Today's first reading is from Psalm 121 from the Old Testament. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will never slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at the right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over you coming and going, both now and forevermore. Our second reading is from Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent and praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So ends today's reading.
You might notice that the second reading from Philippians was also a reading from last week. And it bleeds into this reading from John, which we've read before as well. So the gospel reading is from the gospel according to John, chapter 14, verses 25 through 27. May God bless us in our hearing. All this I have spoken while still with you, but the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Thus ends today's reading. I don't know if anybody... Does anybody know what the most often repeated phrase in the whole Bible is? Anybody have any guess on that? What do you... Yes! It's in there between 80 and a zillion times. Depending on the translation, it's different. But either do not be afraid, fear not, is in the Bible just a bazillion times. They're trying to send a message. Don't be afraid, right? Even though they tell us to fear God at times, they're saying don't be afraid. And as we've talked about before, the translation of fear when related to God is much more closer to awe. Hold God in awe. Now, I don't know if I'm the only science fiction nerd, maybe, in the room. But fear, the mind killer, is a quote from Dune, right? It's a science fiction novel that came out in the 60s, about 50 years ago. And the main character is really a messianic character. And part of his prayer and mantra and his spiritual training starts with fear is the mind killer. You know, do not fear. When I walk through, or I let the fear pass through me and go through, when it is left, the only thing left is me. That's a paraphrasing. That's Paul Muad'Dib. Okay, no more. I promise, that's it. That's it, no more. But he's acutely aware that fear actually shuts down logic, shuts down and misuses our instincts against us. And I come to think if we only knew and really believed about that advocate Jesus talks about, that little slice of God inside us, if we really had any idea how powerful that is, we'd probably be afraid, because we wouldn't have excuses anymore for being afraid, for not getting things, for not taking action. And if we had any idea how powerful we really were, we'd probably be amazed. I think of this young guy. This is a long time ago, but there was this young guy who was on a spiritual path, and he was on fire. He was on fire, and a lot of people were coming to him, and he didn't really know what to make of that. He wasn't sure, like, it made sense, and he walked up a long hill in Maine to the top of this hill overlooking this incredible meadow. And when he got to the top of the hill, he realized it was a bee farm. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these massive hives all over this giant meadow. And as he looked down, he saw all the flowers and just thousands and thousands of bees racing back and forth across the path he had walked up. I don't know how he hadn't been aware of it. And he was terrified. He was like, A, I'm allergic to bees. B, if you get stung and you get afraid, you give off these pheromones that tell the bees to attack you because you're now dangerous, because you're afraid. And he was shaking like a leaf. He's like, how am I going to get down this hill? How am I going to get out of here? And he said a prayer and put his head down and just walked calmly down the path and counted his breath as he walked to the end of the path. And he let the bees go around him. I don't know. He wasn't looking. He was just looking down. And he got out of there. And when he got out, he probably was, ready to pass out. But he laid down on a rock and just let the sun shine on him. And he began to pray and meditate. And when he was meditating, he had a vision of a mouse who was being tormented by this kitten. Now, the kitten wasn't even a real cat. It was a little kitten, but compared to a mouse, it was huge, right? And he's running away, and now he's the mouse. And he's terrified, and he's ducking through alleys, and he ducks into a warehouse, and there's a broken piece of glass, and he looks in his reflection from the glass, and he sees a giant knight with a shield and a full coat of finely buffed, beautiful armor, and a lance that had to be 8 feet long. And he looked at the little kitten, and he started to laugh at how he was terrified of this kitten. If we only knew how powerful we were, we'd be laughing at the stuff that we're afraid of. So, AA is a group that has really taken spiritual principles from the Bible and work them out in a way that's just been tremendously useful. And they haven't really come up with anything new, but they've sort of repackaged biblical principles in a way that are actually effective. And one of the things they suggest is a spiritual inventory, which is also emotional, mental, psychological. It covers a lot of stuff. But the point of it is to clear the path so that the Spirit can shine through. Now, the first segment of that, the first third of that is about resentments. So a third of the entire inventory is about resentments. The middle third of the inventory is about fear. And the funny thing is that every resentment has fear in it. So if we're angry about something that happened more than 5 minutes ago, it's a resentment. The purpose of the resentment is to hold you responsible for the stuff I'm afraid of. Right? So actually, 2/3 of their inventory is really about fear. So it's a very powerful influence in our lives. They describe fear as a corroding thread or a corroding fiber. The fabric of our existence shot through with it. So think about a loom, a textile loom, where they're making a rug or something or a blanket. And that thread goes back and forth across that loom. There's no part of that rug that isn't touched by that thread. As there's no part of life that's not touched by fear. Now, the key is we don't want to be afraid. So we convince ourselves that we're not really afraid. We're just angry. We're just mad about something, or it's somebody else's stuff. But it's everywhere, and it's no fun to be afraid, so we dress it up so it looks like something else. I remembered an essay this week I read, God, my goodness, it must have been 15 years ago, about fear. That kind of touched me, so I looked and looked until I found it again, and I read it again this week. And they talk about our human instincts, right, which are vital. They keep us alive. Like if we didn't have a sex instinct, there'd be no species, right? If we didn't have an instinct to eat, we'd starve to death. If we didn't have instincts for security, we'd be in trouble. But when our instincts take over and rule us and dominate us, that's when we get into trouble. See, the instincts are supposed to be marshaled by the advocate that Jesus is talking about, by the Spirit. And hey, Jesus loved a good banquet. It's not like we're not supposed to enjoy anything. We're supposed to be austere. But we are supposed to be guided by the Spirit. And these instincts are necessary, but when they dominate us, they cause a mental, emotional liabilities. They cause us to use our instincts to actually block us from God. My instincts, when they run amok, my instincts to be part of a family or part of a group of friends is healthy, right? But when I need everybody to like me, not healthy, right? And as our instincts run amok, it's like that window we talked about where the sun's shining through, but it's covered with muck or covered with masking tape. And I can't see or feel the sunlight of the Spirit when my instincts are based in fear and they overtake me. Right? That still small voice. It's small and it's still. So my ego often drowns out that still small voice. And it's really hard to hear. I think of a guy who's drowning as a perfect example of this. Like there's a guy drowning in the middle of a lake and some lifeguard swims out to try to save the guy. What does the guy do as soon as the lifeguard gets anywhere near them? Yeah. Kills them, right? Clings to them, jumps on them for dear life, killing them both. And that's what my emotional and mental statuses do, my instincts do, when they're running the show and I'm afraid and I'm full of ego. I'll drown you and me. Right? And the Spirit gets drowned. That fear is the mind killer, and in that case, kills the person physically. Most of us are appalled at the suggestion that we need spiritual inventory. We need to take stock of ourselves. And, hey, I'm doing pretty good. Hey, I'm doing better than this guy. No, I'm not that bad. And that's that ego that really wants to stay in control. The ego will drown out that still small voice with a defense trial. Hey, well, look, I gave at the church. I walked in John's crop walk. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. Okay, but am I really good? Jesus says once, only God's good. So am I really aligned with God, or am I doing stuff I think makes me look good, or am I doing stuff I think's good, rather than really working hard to be connected to God and doing what I'm guided to do there? When we react to fear, and we come by it honestly, like this is what we're taught to do from pretty much out of the womb. When we act and react, because God's proactive, the Spirit's proactive. God's not waiting around for me to do the right thing. The Spirit's always proactive, and people, humans, especially when we're afraid, we're reactive. We react to a situation. So somewhere in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, where they're talking about fear, they talk about us setting in motion trains of circumstances that brought us to a certain point. Might have come by it honestly. I might have been doing my best. Might have been doing my best. Well, like I've mentioned before, when I'm afraid, my mind comes up with 6 bad ideas. And then I pick the least bad of those 6 bad ideas, execute it, and wonder why things didn't work out well. Well, I did the least bad. I didn't stab the guy. I didn't burn the place down. I just cut him off a trail. How didn't this work? And my solutions, when I'm in fear, always lead to difficulties. So we set the ball rolling with our reactions to fear. And then we wonder what happened. We create a resentment so somebody else can be responsible for that circumstance. It's really hard to see this. It's really hard. I could see you doing it, easy. But it's hard for me to see me. It's hard for us to see ourselves reacting to fear. Why do we have fear? Where does it come from? Right? I often used to, I used to have an idea that I have fear now because something bad happened at one point. Something really bad happened. And often a fear can be rooted in something really bad happening and how I reacted to it. But if I have a fear now of, let's say, rejection, I can look back through my life and see where that fear was prominent many, many times. And I might even be able to remember the first time I strongly felt that fear of rejection. Maybe I was in middle school or who knows. And I reacted. I did something to solve or to treat that fear. And the interesting thing is, I did that same thing for the next 20 years when that fear came up. And it works. These things work in the short term. We're not stupid people. We get some relief immediately from the fear, but inevitably the fear comes back, and my mind, my ego that wants desperately to stay in control, already has a solution for that fear. Unfortunately, it just creates this circle where the fear comes back, and I basically do the same thing. Now, I slick my act up. I think of a time when my dad was shaving on his way to work, and I think I shared this one other time. It might have even been in the very first sermon I preached for you guys when I was over at Rutland. But I remember being a little, like 3 or 4 year old kid, and my dad's shaving, and I knock on the door, "Dad, I have to pee." So he lets me in to pee, and I go over and I flush the toilet first and pee against the stream, right? Pee against the rotation, and a lot of magical things happened. It bubbled up, it was cool, it was crazy, the stream was darting, it was, and my father looks at me in horror that his kid is so dim-witted that he flushes the toilet first. He says, "What, are you stupid? You don't flush the toilet first." And my mother comes down the hall yelling, "Don't call him stupid." And my father's like, "Look what he's doing." Like I just stabbed a cat to death or something. And I remember like just the horror on my father's face. And I knew I don't ever want to look dumb again. So from that point on, I learned from my dad, like the solution for that is to pretend you always know something. Don't ever ask a question. Don't ever let on that you don't know something. If you're doing something stupid, make up a reason that you're smarter than somebody else. So I basically did the same thing for the next 20 years. And here I am at 30, 35 years old, when I look like I'm doing something stupid, really yelling like a 4-year-old, "I am not stupid." I mean, I'm doing something different, but it's really the same thing. So over time, the reason I have a fear today that I had many years ago is not because of that thing that happened when I was 4. It's because I reinforced the lie in that fear that I'm not okay. You know, the reality is I was a really neat, creative, wacky kid. I was a little genius, and some nerd would have probably just peed and flushed it after, like all the losers. That's not true. No, but but Dad couldn't see that, you know. As soon as we realize and can admit that our situations of our own making, our difficulties are of our own making, as soon as we have the humility to kind of surrender and say, you know what, I guess I'm not going to figure this out. You know, we're on our way. We're really on our way. That opens us up to communing with the real God, the advocate Jesus is talking about. Not that my idea of God, or, you know, if I do this right, I was listening to a CD this week, and, you know, the woman was really cracking me up, but she's very brilliant. And she talks about, if I do 9 novenas, then the 10th day I should get what this God that I invent. You know, if I behave myself, I'll actually get it my way. You know, all that stuff has to go. And when I can get that out of the way, I can actually commune a little bit with the God that we can really trust and rely on. That's the goal, is to trust and rely on God. One piece of good news is that fear can actually be a useful tool if we're trained to recognize it and notice it, be aware of it. When we sense ourselves being angry, we can try to figure out why we're angry, or figure out who to blame for being angry, or we can actually pray, right? We can pray. We can ask God to remove that anger. That alarm clock could be fear. That red flag could come out as me being afraid of something. And that could give us an opportunity to pause and to really have a holy moment, to get into the moment and ask God to be present, to stop trying to solve whatever it is that's got me afraid, and to ask God to remove that fear and direct me to what God would have me be. You know, as we've talked about before, not do, because I already got 6 bad ideas. What would you have me be, God? What actions would that person take? As we think about ourselves as a community and think about our survival instincts, our survival tools at Chaffin, right? What might those be? What might those be? When we were faced at times over the years with, you know, less people coming, shrinking membership, money issues, what are our solutions? You know, what have we tried to do? That's a question to really ponder and to think about over the next week. The next week we'll be talking about discernment. So one useful part of discernment is to look at what have we done? And in the short term, whatever it is we come up with usually makes us feel better. But if we can look back over a period of time, we can, and through the right lens. I mean, it ain't easy. I hope I'm not giving the idea that it's easy to do this. It's really a life's work. And it takes friends. It takes other people to help me. But if we look back over the lifetime of Chaffin in the last 20 or 30 years, and we ask ourselves, okay, what have our difficulties been and what have our solutions been? What has been the source of those solutions? And again, I don't want you to beat yourselves up. I think you guys love the church, and I think you've been busting your butts on behalf of the church and trying to support the church, trying to love the church. But to look honestly at, okay, how did we handle this, and what were the results of that? All the results. Now, I remember when I was doing my fear inventory, I'd put my reaction, and I'd come out with, like, positive circumstances. Oh, yeah, I did this, and then that good thing happened. And, you know, my mentor was like, yeah, what else happened? What else? What else was a subset of that? What else was a consequence of that? And in being honest, not good. Not good. But if we can have the humility to go back and look honestly at ourselves, that's going to be a key component in getting out of the way in addressing fear so that we can really approach opportunities, not as problems, but as opportunities for the Spirit to work through us, to use us as vessels, and to flow into the world, flow into this church and into the community. It's not easy, but it can be done, and I honestly don't know any other way how to live. I've tried a lot of stuff, not with a lot of success. But looking at myself and where I'm blocking the sunlight of the Spirit has seemed to serve me, relatively well. So what I'd like you to write on those cards, and I forgot this was going to be after the offering, is something you're afraid of. Don't put your name on it. What are your fears? It could be your fear in life, could be stuff at church, but I'd like you to put down, if you can, specifically stuff. What are you afraid of around Chaffin, around our future? What are you afraid? You can put down, minister is lunatic. Unbridled ministry. Whatever it is, write it down. Put it down. It's okay. And we can offer those fears up to God. But I will be collecting those and talking about them a little bit more in depth next week. I like stories that wrap up neat and crisp and give a really clear, simple, easy message. But that's not really what we're doing here. That's easy and it's fun. But really what I want you to do is leave here struggling and wrestling and asking yourselves tough questions and taking those questions to God and then coming back to us with where you feel God might be leading you, God might be guiding you. This stuff isn't easy. God, we thank you for the many wonderful folks here at Chaffin who love you, love this place, and love each other. I ask that you bless them with courage to match that love, to really dig down deep and find you inside of themselves. I ask that you bless everybody with the tremendous gift of seeing how remarkable they are, how blessed they are, how powerful they really are. I ask that you shine a light on that advocate within each of us that Jesus talked about. Now we might be able to quiet down just a little bit so that we can hear that still small voice. Take that masking tape off the windows so that we can feel and see that sunlight of the Spirit. We ask that you do this in Jesus' name. Amen.